Now that our manifest destiny had been fulfilled, we started to actually fill up this land. And one of the most inviting events was the gold rush of 1849. Northern California at Sutter's Mill would find tons of gold. Well, at least throughout this region we would find tons of gold. But the number of people that would rush to California brought up the idea of California statehood. Now, there were many things that came with that search for gold, of course, because not everybody was going to find gold. You were going to have to feed those people, entertain those people. You're going to have to provide the supplies that they're going to need. And other people are going to fulfill those demands. But the question comes up with California as more and more people move there. They've now achieved enough population that they can request statehood. But the question of slavery does come into play here. To this point, we had been able to achieve a balance of the number of states that are slave states and the number that are free states in order to keep a balance of power in our Congress. And to California entering, how they would come in either as a free or a slave state was going to offset that balance. Slave states would argue that California should come in as a slave state, although there was very little towards any slavery in California. And Zachary Taylor, the president of this time period, actually favored the idea of popular sovereignty, in which the people would decide the issue of slavery. But as this became more heated, we had to turn to our great compromisers, Daniel Webster from the north and Henry Clay from our mid-region. They were going to come to one last compromise to save the Union. Although not everybody would be pleased with this compromise, like John Calhoun from the South, who vehemently stood for states' rights in deciding these types of issues, the Compromise of 1850 was going to save the Union. It saved the Union by appeasing as many parties as possible. For example, the South would get the fugitive slave law. This was set to deal with runaway slave issue. The North would get California as a free state. In order to keep that balance going, Maine entered as well. Now, for a good 10 years, this action would keep the Union together. But parties were going to start to rise in opposition. For example, the Republican Party was founded with the purpose of being anti-slave. And then the questions continued, because this new territory that we had achieved through Manifest Destiny was now open for populations to move there. And in 1854, the question over the territories of Kansas and Nebraska would bring this issue of slavery and power within our Congress back to the forefront. And in 1854, with the help of Senator Stephen Douglas, would pass the act which would again establish popular sovereignty as the method of determining the slavery issue. But it wasn't over there. Because as soon as this became the decision, ferocious attacks by anti-slavery and pro-slavery camps started in Kansas. And these attacks were known as Bleeding Kansas. Pro versus anti-slave. Leaders like John Brown, who were abolitionist leaders, but ones that were willing to use violence, would flock to this territory. People from Missouri, right next door, who were pro-slavery, would flock to this territory. Even in our own Congress, Congressman Preston Brooks would savagely beat a Northern Senator, Charles Sumner. He was doing this to protect the honor of his senator uncle, but it really started to illustrate how the United States was becoming polarized over the issue of slavery.